Governments to order. First item on our agenda is roll call.
Director Jim Brown. Here. Director Larry Stransky.
Yes.
Director Richie Wasserman.
Here.
Director Tess Alvin Smith.
Here.
Director John Haschak.
Here.
Director Rex Jackman.
Here.
Vice Chair Michael Carter.
Here.
And Chair Dan Jurdy.
Here. Okay, we're going to immediately convene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, then recess and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. Next thing on our agenda is public expression on items that are not on the agenda. Do we have any members of the public who wish to discuss any items that are not on the agenda? If you do, come on up and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Diana Clark, and thank you for this opportunity, Chairman Jurdy and members of the MCOG board. I'm the director of the Ukiah Senior Center, and I've been the representative for the 5 senior centers on the Social Services Transportation Advisory Committee for the past year. First off, I'd like to thank the MCOG staff, Nafili Barrett and Janet Orth, for planning a second meeting of the Senior Center Directors to meet to talk about the performance standards and our reporting statistics, and I understand that that meeting is going to be set up in March, so we're very grateful for the opportunity to share that information and how it's being reported to MCOG. You may have seen the recent article in the Ukiah Daily Journal about the Ukiah Senior Center's passengers voicing their fears that the funding for our bus program might not be renewed. 80% of the Senior Center Transportation Program funding comes from the local transportation fund monies that MTA claims through MCOG on behalf of the 5 county senior centers. If MTA does not continue to claim these funds on behalf of the senior centers, simply speaking, these programs will fail. And our seniors are very concerned about this. During the past year, MTA repeatedly stated that it wanted to end its involvement with the senior center bus programs, terminating a successful collaboration that's lasted for 4 decades. And this year is the first time that MTA's contracts for the 5 senior centers stated that its terms would start on July 1st, but that the contracts would be renewed on a month-to-month basis throughout the entire year. We have several other county contracts. None of our county contracts state that they renew on a month-to-month basis. Moreover, of all the contracts that we have with the county, each and every one of those agencies has already contacted the senior centers and said that they want to renew those contracts and how much those contracts are going to be for. But we haven't heard anything from MTA with respect to its intention to renew our contracts. In just 28 days, MTA is required to submit its claim for LTF monies in the coming year. For decades, MTA has included in its total LTF claim approximately 15% to fund the senior center transportation programs. To date, the senior centers haven't received any assurances from MTA that it will continue to seek funding for the senior centers in the coming year, as it has in years past. We were going to raise these issues at the MTA board meeting in February, but the board meeting was inexplicably canceled less than 48 hours before it was to be held. Throughout this year, MTA has claimed that Dial-A-Ride is the same service as the senior center bus programs. But the truth is, the senior centers provide mobility and memory impaired seniors with a much higher level of door-through-door assistance for their safety. The senior centers also provide same-day service, whereas Dial-A-Ride makes them call and make reservations in advance, at least 24 hours. Our seniors are upset that they may lose their senior center bus service because they rely on this door-through-door assistance that Dial-A-Ride does not provide. From July through December, the Ukiah Senior Center carried 4,225 passengers, of which over 1,500 were door-through-door and over 1,000 were wheelchair passengers. From July through December, collectively, Willits, Ukiah, and Fort Bragg Senior Centers combined carried over 13,000 passenger trips and traveled over 46,000 miles. The loss of funding for these programs would be devastating for our seniors and our disabled passengers. So today, we're just urging MCOG to continue its support for the senior center transportation programs in the coming year, and if necessary, hold public hearings before any changes are made to reduce funding so that the public can be heard on these services and how vital they are for our seniors in our community. Thank you very much.
My name is Richard Baker. I am the director of the Willits Senior Center. I serve on the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council and am the alternative Senior Centers representative on the Transportation Productivity Committee. The Senior Center directors are very grateful. I'll reiterate what Diana said to Janet and Nafili for holding meetings and allowing us to voice our concerns. And I'm concerned about whether or not the Senior Center's contract with MTA will be renewed as well. The Senior Center has multiple contracts with the County of Mendocino that are in the process of being renewed. All of these contracts are done on a yearly basis. And last year, Carla Meyer, MTA's general manager, changed our yearly contract to a monthly contract. I planned on inquiring what MTA's intentions were at the last board meeting, but that meeting was unexpectedly canceled at the last meeting. There have been repeated claims by Carla Meyer that the MTA's dial-a-ride service provides the same service as a Senior Center door-through-door service, and as such, the Senior Center's transportation is a duplication of transportation services. One concerned senior, because she was afraid she was going to be without transportation, started a petition which now has over 400 signatures. And I've gathered many testimonials attesting to how losing this service would have negatively impact their lives. The reason seniors are so concerned is because MTA's dial-ride service does not meet their needs. Senior centers not meeting MCOG performance standard was one reason Carla Meyer brought up a reason to discontinue subcontracting with the senior centers to provide transportation services. Once MTA's latest performance standards are made available, a comparison can be made to the senior center's performance standards, and I'm confident that this comparison will show that the senior centers are meeting 3 of the 4 MCOG's performance standards, and MTA is only meeting 1 of 4 of the performance standards. Diana, Clark, or I will provide the MCOG board and the MTA ad hoc committee with these comparisons once they become available. This information should be considered before any discussions by MTA is made about the future of senior transportation services. I respectfully request that the MCOG board continue to support senior center transportation programs through local transportation fund monies. Thank you for your support.
Hello, my name is Bonnie Schaefer, and I am a program coordinator for North Coast Opportunities. I am a coordinator for the foster grandparent program, and we have about 15 seniors that work in this that volunteer in this program, and they are concerned that this contract will not be renewed because a lot of them rely on the dial-a-ride bus service. So, thank you.
So it's not on the agenda, but I'll just say I'm sorry that there's been this uncertainty created with the month-to-month contracts. I guess I didn't realize they were switched over to month-to-month at the time, and I'm the Board of Supervisors appointee to MTA, and I do hope that we can all work together with MCOG staff and MTA staff and the senior centers to come up with a satisfactory resolution to this, because I think you've made excellent points.
I'll also add that, as mentioned, there will be a meeting sometime in March of the Senior Center Directors, and we can include a report on the outcomes of that meeting on the next MCOG agenda, so there would be some additional opportunity for questions and comment.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Hashak?
Do we know when the next MTA meeting will be? March 25th?
The last Wednesday of the month, fourth Wednesday of the month.
Okay. At what time?
I think they always hold them at 1:30.
1:30, and it's true that the meeting was canceled, and there wasn't a reason given to the board members why it was being canceled.
Thank you.
It's in Willits, I believe.
This upcoming meeting's in
Willits.
Willits? Okay, yeah, they normally are concurrently in Ukiah and Fort Bragg, but we're holding apparently an offsite meeting in Willits this coming month.
Then what is the location?
We would normally be in the Willits City Hall, I believe.
Okay.
It could be, if we ask for it. I think it's, I'm not sure where they meet in Willits, but They also have the ability to move the, make it open to anywhere as long as it's publicly announced.
The meeting that was canceled was scheduled for the City of Willits at City Hall. However, the next meeting is scheduled for the regular location.
Okay, so then normally the
next-
locations are the Ukiah Conference Center and concurrently by video conference, the Franklin Street MTA bus facility in Fort Bragg. So people can attend in either location.
But this one in Willits, we need,
Well,
we don't know the location.
Loretta just corrected that
Canceled was in Willits.
this month's meeting was,
Oh.
or last month's meeting was in Willits. So the upcoming meeting in March will be as normal in Ukiah and Fort Bragg at the same time.
Okay.
Thank you, Loretta, for correcting us on that. Okay, do we have any other public comments on non-agenda items? Not seeing any. We'll go to our regular calendar, which is the Executive Committee recommendations of February 24, 2020, which includes the draft 2021 Regional Transportation Planning Agency budget. This is not an action item, but informational item. Janet, do you want to introduce this?
Yes, I'll speak to that. Thank you. So the executive committee met on February 24th. You have my written staff report here. And it looks like all three members are here today, Chair Judy, Vice Chair Carter, and Director Wasserman. And I'd just like to make a few highlights about that first draft budget that staff had proposed and the executive committee concurred with. You've got this spreadsheet here that's kind of a snapshot view. Later on, I will have a more extensive sheet that I do that has comparisons to the prior year and a lot of notes and things. So this is just kind of the bare bones, gives you the essential figures that we have to date. So it all starts with the auditors, the county auditor controller's estimate of the local transportation funds, and that's the quarter-cent sales tax that's dedicated to transportation. And that number is up. It's over 4 million for the first time. We've never seen 4 million before. So that's an estimate, and let's hope that will hold up in the coming year. And I did want to kind of explain a little how he got to that. It looks as though it's up a full 8% and more compared to the estimate at the same time last year. But the economy's not growing at that rate. The way I explained it to the committee after talking to the auditor is that that estimate, if you look at the year ago estimate, that was an early estimate, and this is an early estimate. And those now we have much more current actuals. So his calculation is based on an increase of revenues this fiscal year to date for the first 6 months of fiscal year 1920, and that was up 7% over the same months of actual revenues a year ago. And then he took a 3-year average of those same figures and came up with 3.5%. So that's more the gradual curve that he's looking at, and he applied that for a more conservative percentage estimate to the first 6 months of actuals this year that we already know, and the rest of this fiscal year as a projection. So he went with the 3.5%, and the rate of inflation according to the Consumer Price Index right now is 3.0%. So that's a little closer to the way things seem to be going. But it's good to see some additional revenues projected. The economy seems to be continuing to grow. So I wanted to point that out to you. The next thing I wanted to just mention is that we're focused on the local transportation fund right now at this point in the year because we have to put out a public notice on March 1st that the amount available for transportation to claim, as was mentioned under public expression, MTA gets to claim those funds for their budget. And the rest of this sheet has some other transit monies, and it has all the various funding sources that go into our planning program. And we do have new year estimates. We don't have the carryover numbers yet. And we're also missing the Regional Service Transportation Program estimate at this stage. So those will be coming. But the important part right now was the local transportation funds, which have to be developed in this spring budget development season. So as far as the allocations, well, one more thing about the revenues. Some good news was that the last closed fiscal year, 2018-19, that we just finished auditing, did have an increase, I should say, what we call excess revenues or unrestricted fund balance above and beyond what was budgeted, above and beyond the budget estimate for fiscal year 18-19 of $215,766. So over $200,000 was left over from the last closed year, last year. So that now gets to roll into this budget as well. So we have an increased estimate and we have some additional funds from the prior year. So that's adding to what's available. And then as far as allocations goes, we have administration is up a little bit due to the built-in cost of living increases in the staffing contract for administration. And that's going up 3.9% for everything, not just the contract, but also the other direct costs that we've calculated that we expect to need this year. I'd like to point out that that's about 11.5% of the new estimate for the local transportation funds, the total estimate of funds, and it's also about 7% of all of the revenues to date. So we're holding that down. It's a little bit down from last year. It was about 12%. So, and we're doing well on that side. Planning wanted the planning budget, asked for a little bit more. The technical advisory committee looked at that, and planning staff together proposed a little bit more for the planning program, an increase of 7.9%. So that's up a little bit. And also the executive committee wanted to continue giving the 2% to the bike and pedestrian facilities and keep that fund going, which is very useful to our member agencies. So those are the allocations that MCOG programs are requesting. And that leaves balance available for transit, public transportation, $3,658,372. So about $3.6 million, and that is 3.1% above last year's figure. And if you'll recall, the CPI inflation rate is 3.0, so keeping pace with inflation. And last year they did have a big windfall. They were the beneficiary of all the increases last year. They had 12.5% last year. So transit should be okay with this available balance to claim. So those are the main things that I wanted to mention. Are there any questions about the budget so far?
Director Hashak?
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at this Exhibit A of the extended cost plan summary. That's a couple pages further down.
Next item, is that under the contract item?
Yes, I believe that's part of the contract item, unless you have a question about it as it relates to the budget.
Well, the question was, it looks like that only goes up about 1% each year. And so is that reflected in the budget we're looking at? And
Let's see, I have the breakdown of the admin budget here from the executive packet if you'd like to.
So I can clarify, the base contracts amount go up just a minimal amount each year. However, there is, what's not reflected in those tables, but is explained on the lower part of the extensions, is that there is a cost of living increase applied to those based on the consumer price index for the year, which for this year is 3%. So that is part of the increase that Janet mentioned in the budget amounts were the cost of living increase as well as additional direct expenses. And then the planning increase includes not only staff, but projects for local agencies as well. So that's why the planning increase was slightly larger.
Right, that planning increase isn't just going to the planning staffing contract, it's also going to work elements. I think it was a pavement management program, the triennial program.
Yeah, that's a significant
Which,
one.
yeah, that benefits all the member agencies. Yeah, what we're calling other direct costs are things like our memberships, the fiscal and performance audits, the accounting services by the county auditor here, legal counsel, travel, communications, things like that. So those are the major categories, and I've been trying to keep that below 60,000, between 50 and 60,000 every year. So we've got that a little under 60,000, 59,000 this year. So that was all reviewed by the committee. This will go on to the next committee, the Transit Productivity Committee, after we receive Mendocino Transit Authority's annual claim for funding. And that committee has members from this board, from MTA's board, and a representative from the senior centers. And they will all look at that and make a recommendation to this council for when it comes time to adopt the budget. And then, of course, in May, we'll kind of have a workshop here and go through all the numbers and present everything that we have and be prepared for the June adoption. Is there anything else?
Any other comments at this point? Do we have any public comments on the draft budget? Okay. Great.
Okay, that's about all I have. Thank you.
And I do appreciate giving sort of the early review of the budget before our later public hearing. I think it's helpful. Okay, then we have approval of extension of the professional services agreement through September 30th, 2021 for administrative and fiscal services Down Associates.
Yes, it's actually being presented as one agenda item, but the actions are A and B. So the staffing for MCOG is provided through contract. The county, on behalf of the agency, conducted a thorough competitive procurement process in 2014 for those staffing services, which resulted in contracts with Dow & Associates for administration and fiscal services and Davy Bates Consulting for planning services. The initial contract was for a 5-year period, which ended in, the last day was September 30th of 2019. In anticipation of the end of that initial period, the executive committee considered continued staffing options at their meeting last year about this time. And they recommended to the MCOG board exercising the option to extend those contracts. The initial contract included provisions for up to 5 one-year extensions for both contracts. The MCOG board concurred with the executive committee's recommendation and appointed an ad hoc committee at that time to work with the contractors on those extensions. During that process, the ad hoc committee expressed an interest in a more streamlined process for the following year, which is this year. So with that in mind, the executive committee considered a number of options at their meeting last week, which included consideration of the draft one-year extensions for both administrative and fiscal and planning services. The executive committee recommended to the MCOG board approval of those one-year extensions. So you will find in your packet the extensions, and attached to each of those is, as previously mentioned, the extended cost plans. These are actually the cost plans that were presented last year, because the one-year extension periods actually include 3 quarters of one fiscal year and the first quarter of the next fiscal year. Multiple fiscal year base costs are included. So this is consistent with these are consistent with the extensions that were approved last year. These will be for 1 additional year. And then, as mentioned, again, the contract amounts are determined by applying the CPI rate to the base rates. So, alternatively, the board may wish to choose an option similar to that of last year and appoint an ad hoc committee, or you may take the ad hoc or the executive committee's recommendation today. So I don't know if the executive committee members would like to add anything to the discussion.
Well, I'll just say, I'm seeing that the other committee members are shaking their heads. They don't want to add any more, but I'll just add that I think the executive committee felt that we're getting excellent service from both contractors, and that the effort involved in putting it out to bid is something that at some point we obviously will be doing, but doesn't seem worth it at this point. So, and the contract that we have allows for these 1-year extensions for up to 5 extensions, I believe.
Yes, that is correct.
I agree with Superintendent Jurdy, but I think that we should actually plan on making this official for a long-term look for an RFP and not keep extending and extending and extending.
So we could certainly do that. Are you suggesting, though, not for this coming fiscal year, but during this coming fiscal, because we're not too far off from July 1 at this point?
Is it too late?
I mean, I think it is, because I think honestly, there's the purpose. In my opinion, if you want to put it out to bid, which at some point we need to do, I think the reason to put it out to bid is because we are going to try to see if there is anybody out there that wants to turn in a bid, and if we just do it really quickly, we won't get any bids, and we've gone through all the expense and effort of putting it out to bid.
Right, but is it possible to just write a contract for the next 5 years instead of doing the extension?
There is not under the current contract. We have to put it out to bid to have a different term. But the staff, go ahead.
Hi, for those of you who may not know me, my name is Lisa Davy Bates, and yeah, the contracts, both of the admin and the planning contracts, are written such that we can only do 1 extension at a time for up to 5 years. So at this point, we would be working on exercising just a 1-year extension. If at some point the board chooses to want to go for another RFP, that at that time they could consider a full 5-year contract.
I just think that we shouldn't do extension for every year. I think we should start looking, and I don't know if it's this year or next year, but.
Okay. Director Hashak?
Thank you. My question would be, is it working for both the entities too? I mean, is this process of 1-year extensions acceptable?
Well, from a contractor's perspective, it is certainly a less time preparing a 1-year extension based on existing terms and conditions and an existing cost plan is much less time consuming than preparing a full proposal. However, submitting a new proposal could potentially have advantages as well. But we are more than willing to, Dow and Associates, I'll let Lisa speak for Davy Bates Consulting, but we at Dow and Associates are definitely willing at this time to continue with the 1-year extension.
And I would say yes. Fortunately, the current contracts allow for, they do adjust year after year for the CPI increase or decrease, whatever it would be. And then also the only other change that happens with our contracts is that we do have an 11.5% increase on only our health benefits, for health and dental benefits. And we've done analysis of that, and year after year it's been, from 7 to 29%, I think it's gone from employee to employee. So fortunately that addition that we added into our contracts has been pretty fair and consistent to both parties. So with that built in and with the CPIs, it's worked for our agents or our company as well.
And Director Brown?
Do we have any public comment on this agenda item? Okay, not seeing it, go ahead.
We got Director Brown, Director Stransky. Yes. Director Wasserman.
What?
Did you say Wasserman? Yes.
Director Alvin Smith.
Yes.
Director Haschak.
Yes.
Director Jackman.
Yes.
Vice Chair Carter.
Yes.
Chair Jurdy.
Yes. And I'll just point out that by extending it, we also protect the agency, because if there were new bids and let's say the only bidders were the current vendors, they could turn in even higher bids. So it works both ways.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll move, oh, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess my question is with what Director Alvin Smith said, was if we're trying to go out for an RFP, what would be the process, the timelines for doing something like that in the future?
My thought is I think we'd want to start this maybe even December, because I think what you would want to do is you'd want to cast the information out widely to people in our region that we're going to be putting this out to bid before we actually put it out to bid, so that, you know, I think it's highly unlikely, but there could be other planning firms that would be interested in this. Again, I think we are likely to get the very same two firms bidding on this because it's such a specialized field. But I think if we go down that road, and we will at some point, I think you want to go down it early enough so that people who are in our region who might have the capacity to do this work would have a chance to, you know, sharpen their pencils and turn in a proposal. Because otherwise, if we just do it with 60 days notice, I think we will end with, I would almost guarantee we'll end with the same two bidders because it's such a specialized field.
And I want to make it clear that I'm not dissatisfied at all. I'm very happy with your services. I just think as if I were in your place, I would like to have a 5-year contract and know that I'm got a job for, you know, in this, you know, that we're solid, not annual. That's
Thank you.
just me.
Appreciate that. So a couple more things to note for board members that were not here during the last procurement process, which I think was everyone. Well, no, maybe Larry was on the board then. Staff cannot conduct that procurement process, so one of the member agencies has to volunteer to do that. So that's why last time it was the county. So that's just one additional step in the process that needs to be factored in.
And just to reiterate, I appreciate your concern about the 5-year, and we do, you know, when we are an extension, it's a, you know, a little bit of a concern, but part of what we did, as Nephili mentioned last year, the ad hoc committee and executive committee requested that we sort of lay out a simplified, streamlined process, which is why we do have, if you look in the contract extensions, they do lay out the amounts through 23, 24. So it's meant to be a simplified process for everybody involved, but yes, we still do have to do the annual extensions. So.
Yeah.
Richard?
Just for clarification, if we went 5 years with 1-year extensions, would that trigger the necessity, or could that be renewed 1 year by 1 year?
So the current contract, so there was the bidding process managed by county staff and approved by the board, which resulted in one bid for each of the two functions, the administration and planning. Those contracts in the RFP process were structured to be a 5-year contract with 1-year extensions optional up to 5 years. So that's how the RFP process was structured, and that's the contracts that we had, the two contracts that we had. We did have just a single bid for each of those two services. We did not have multiple bids. And that's why I'm saying I think it's highly unlikely we will get multiple bids because it being such a specialized field. So I think if we were, at some point when we do this, we would want to give advance notice in the unlikely chance that we might get more than one bid, just because that's what you want when you put things out to bid. But I see no real reason to do that at this point sooner than sooner than we have to do that with these 1-year extensions.
So after 5 years, it would be a necessity to put it out for bid. Okay,
Yes.
that was my question. Thanks.
And I'm sorry, if I could just make one last comment before we move on. On Exhibit A of my extension, there was a typo on the date. If you look on page 3 of 3, it says in the very last sentence, the current extension period is effective October 1, 2020 through June 30. It's actually meant to say September 30th. So just that brief, and it's corrected for this signature.
Okay, so duly
extension.
noted, it was corrected for the,
Yeah.
all right.
For the final.
Okay. We have a discussion item on the additional MCOG specific power to allow for regional housing related planning and application for the State Regional Early Action Plan Fund. This is about some new funding that's coming in from the state for housing planning.
Yes, so, as I reported to the board previously, AB 101, which was the budget trailer bill, created several new funding opportunities related to planning and infrastructure in support of housing production. Of interest specifically to MCOG is a new program that provides housing planning funds for regional agencies that have RHNA responsibilities. Regional Housing Needs Allocation is RHNA. The budget or the bill created the program just as a one-time funding source. There would be $383,245 available to MCOG that can be used for a variety of activities that increase housing planning and accelerate housing production. The funds are fairly flexible in what types of housing planning activities they can be used for. They could be used for a regional housing planning project. They could also be sub-allocated to member agencies for housing-related planning projects. So we have had discussions with the local planning directors and the technical advisory committee, and there's been several ideas that have been discussed about potential projects that could be done under this program, and interest in moving forward with this. However, staff determined that it was important before going any further that we get authorization from our member agencies. Our Joint Powers Agreement identifies two specific powers: transportation planning and economic development. It also allows for any other specific power, including regional planning and other functional areas besides transportation and economic development, which has been expressly authorized by resolutions adopted by the respective bodies of each of the parties to this agreement. So because housing is not specifically called out, and because this particular program would require a new agreement with the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is an agency that we have not previously worked with in this capacity, all of our current funding sources come through Caltrans, so we have agreements with them. We thought that it was important before getting any further into this to get that authorization through an amendment of the Joint Powers Agreement. So we discussed this with the Executive Committee at their meeting last week, and again, there were a number of potential ideas discussed by the committee members for how this might be used. But in general, there was support, and the Executive Committee recommended that the MCOG board move forward with an amendment to the JPA to allow for this. So what we would suggest is that the board discuss this today and provide direction to staff to come back at the next meeting with a formal JPA amendment. That would include templates that can be used by the member agencies, because it would have to be approved by those agencies. Following that, the amendment would become effective once all of the member agencies adopt those resolutions authorizing the amendment, and we submit notice to the Office of the Secretary of State. If that happens, if that is approved, then at that time staff would continue working with local agencies to prepare an application for the funding. We can apply for up to 25% initially, which we would do probably not a full 25%, but we would apply for some funds initially so that MCOG staff could work administratively with the local agencies, and then we would, based on what the local agencies came up with, we would submit an application for the balance of the funding. That application is due by the end of January of next year, and then local agencies have until August of 2023 to use the funding. So that concludes my staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions, and the executive committee members may wish to add on as well.
So I'll just add that it's that this is sort of a long time in coming. That I think we've seen for many years, maybe decades even. The state's been looking increasingly at linking transportation funds with land use development. You often hear Caltrans officials, maybe not so much in District 1 because we have such a slow growth rate here, but in other parts of California, lament that cities, counties, whatever, may be creating large subdivisions, and then the next thing Caltrans has to do is add a new off-ramp or something in response to the development that was made by local governments. And so it's not really a surprise that they're starting to link some transportation, or I should say housing planning grants now to transportation planning agencies. These funds, as I think Nifili just explained, will be available only to the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and that other funds are also going directly to the cities and the county. These funds, ultimately, we could choose to pass through all or a portion of the funds onto the cities and the county to add to the amount they're getting, or we could choose to retain some or all of those funds for planning for housing that would be done through a coordinated proposal through MCOG. So it's kind of at our option later, which I like that flexibility. Really see no downside to this, and think that this is a good thing for the state to be making these planning funds available. And I'm also encouraged by how flexible they are, because there's so many different ideas on how to encourage housing. And it sounds like these funds are fairly flexible in how the funds can be used for planning for that housing. So any other comments from any of the?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
The city of Willits has been looking to expand our realm of influence by having more housing. And we have done the planning and quite a few things, and I think it's really nice that somebody has started to come along with this. The one problem that we have is the county, because they're the ones that own the land that we have to take over. And it was interesting to me, because I've been around long enough to know that some of the land that we want to take back was redistricted by the county many years ago, and that has the sewer and the water and everything at that particular place. And then the county took it back over, and that was in the 80s. And I know that because my wife was on city council at that particular time. And so the problem that we're having is that we're wanting to take our realm of influence past that, but the county still wants to take a bite out of what we had originally before they took it and rezoned it or redirected it so it was in the county and not in the city. And I don't know where I'm really going with this, other than that this is really a problem for us, if anybody has this problem, because we're inventing the wheel the second time, and the county's charging us for reinventing the wheel the second time. And so I think that really that the people need to know a little history before, all of this things come out and and make some firm decisions on these things. And I don't know if this SB 101 has taken any of that into effect. And I know this is probably just one little place in the whole world, but it's a real problem for us.
So maybe I could structure this in a different way for the staff. So, for example, my understanding is these funds would be fairly flexible.
Yes.
And would, for example, these funds be available to cover, let's say, a LAFCO application to expand a sphere of influence, in other words, pay LAFCO staff time to review and to prepare a sphere of influence amendment, if that was what a city wanted to do, and also pay for that planning process?
So I can't answer specifically about paying LAFCO. It's possible it's something we could look into. I will say that Willett's city staff has talked to us about the sphere of influence study and some of the challenges they're facing as far as that study goes in terms of funding certain aspects of it. So they've talked to us about the possibility of using this particular grant or the other source created under AB 101 that goes directly to cities and counties for that. So that's the type of thing that definitely could be considered under this program.
I guess along those lines, I'd like you to look into, could, for example, because I've never been on a tax share exchange agreement committee, either on the city side or the county side, but the county of Mendocino has, for several years with different members serving on it, had a committee that has met off and on with the city of Ukiah. And I've often wondered if it might be simpler if such a committee existed with the county and could be the city of Ukiah or a different city, but focused strictly on land that was for housing. Because my sort of third-party review of what's been going on or not going on between the city of Ukiah and the county of Mendocino is it's been fairly complicated because so much of the land and so much of the discussion seems to be, at least the part that I hear, seems to be about sales tax and not about housing. And I think some of the discussions I just heard, and I've heard before from board member Stransky, and I've had off and on myself with the city of Fort Bragg, really have nothing to do with sales tax and just have to do with housing. And I personally think that it would be simpler if there was a discussion between the city between a city and the county if it was strictly about housing, because at that point you're only deciding how much of the property tax, let's say, that the county gives up and lets the city get, because the cities get so little property tax. The county would still get an increase in property tax because land developed has a higher value. So if the county, instead of giving a theoretical 30 cents on the dollar in property tax, I don't know, throwing out a number, got 15 cents on the dollar, it's still more than it's getting right now as bare land or as largely undeveloped land. And the city would, instead of getting maybe 10 cents or 8 cents on the dollar, would get 25 cents or, some larger amount. So I'm curious, could any of these funds be used to pay for some sort of negotiation process between a city and a county on a tax share agreement, specifically on only dealing with housing? Again, ideas range from an annexation, which is, I think, kind of where Larry was going, or might be in the case of the city of Fort Bragg and the county, it might be that there's land already in the city that the city gets such a tiny percentage of the property tax in city limits, and it's undeveloped land already in the city, that if the county gave up some of its property tax, which is at this point almost nothing anyway.
Good luck.
But it might happen. And in exchange, if the county could get some credit for a portion of the housing built in the city, and in exchange the city got a larger share of the property tax on that brown field that's being developed or whatever. Anyway, I'm just curious if that would be an eligible expense, because I do think those discussions need to take place, and it's like one of those things that everybody says they should do, and it rarely happens because there's so many other things that are kind of pushing to the front of everybody's business.
So it sounds like something that would be eligible, but we can look into it and confirm.
Okay, thanks.
I just have one little question. So this has nothing to do with low-income housing. It could be any kind of housing.
Yes, it could be any kind of housing. Our regional housing needs allocation the state determines the overall housing need, and then that's allocated among the agencies for all income levels.
Thank you.
I have one quick question.
Pull your microphone.
I'm sorry.
No, just pull your microphone down just so you get picked up.
One quick question for clarification, then another question to you. So these are funds that are available for the regional transportation. They're not competitive funds.
Just a block amount,
Block
yeah.
grant, okay. The second question is, what about capacity within your organization? Do you have the capacity? Can you
So-
do it? Or are you gonna have to hire more staff? Or
That's
you-
a good
Or
question.
we have to start a whole new branch?
That is a good question. Thank you for asking. It is something that we have talked about. We think that for this particular program, because it is one time, and it sounds like there's a good chance that we would sub-allocate at least part of those funds. We would have costs associated with administering a grant program essentially, but we wouldn't be doing an extensive amount of work in-house. So I think it would be manageable if the state continues along this line and creates other funding programs for housing planning at the regional level. Then it could be something that we would need to look more closely at. But I think for now, for this one-time source, it's manageable.
Thank you.
Director Hatchak.
Thank you. Does this have anything to do with trying to get the housing located near where there's public transportation? Is that part of this? Because I'm not seeing it in this, but I've heard a lot about it.
So there's a term, it's a transit priority area. Yeah. However, we don't have any of those in Mendocino County. That applies only when transit has a 15-minute headway, and we're nowhere near achieving that anywhere in Mendocino County. So we don't have any areas that could apply to. It could potentially for other areas be applicable, but for us, it is not in regards to this grant program. There is, however, the same bill created what's known as a pro-housing designation, that agencies can be deemed by the state to be pro-housing if they meet certain conditions, and that's something that the local agencies may want to investigate if they are working on changing any kind of practices through this program. They may want to look at activities that could qualify them for that pro-housing designation. And I think there's actually a lot of those activities already happening here, and so it may just be a matter of making that official with the state through whatever their process is.
We have lost grants in the past that required transit-oriented development. There was the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Grant Program, and our local agency applied and was not successful at that, even though they did their best to get the development close to transit and have all kinds of walking and biking. It was going to be a retirement community. So it's very difficult in this county to meet the definitions that they want for that.
So we're looking for direction, is that what we're doing?
So yes, we are. So at this point, if we could have direction from the board, maybe a motion to send this with our support to our member agencies, recommending that they, because they have to individually amend the Joint Powers Authority. Yeah.
Actually, I would recommend that the action today be to provide direction to staff, and we will come back next month with the formal amendment that then the member agencies.
Okay.
I will move that we direct the staff to prepare a Joint Powers Authority amendment to specify regional housing planning as an authorized Mendocino Council of Governments power.
Second.
Okay, motion and second. Any more discussion? Any members of the public wish to discuss this item? Okay, I guess roll call, because
Director Brown?
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman?
Yes.
Alvin Smith?
Yes.
Haschak?
Yes.
Jackman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Carter?
Yes.
Chair Drudy.
Yes. Okay, thanks. Okay, now we have the consent calendar, which is the minutes of February 3rd, along with the acceptance of the 18-19 MCOG fiscal audit.
I'll just mention I have a limited number of hard copies of the fiscal audit document if anybody is interested in having that.
And I'll just mention, we did discuss the audit a little bit in the MCOG Executive Committee as well, and had no concerns.
Move
Right,
approval.
we had a clean audit.
We also wanted to point out there was an error in the February 3rd minutes on agenda item number 14. There's a missing vote, so now it's
Okay.
going to be amended.
Corrected? Okay, thank you. Okay, it's all right, you move.
approval.
I'll second.
Okay. Do we have any public comments on the consent calendar? Okay, let's we'll vote.
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman?
Yes.
Alvin Smith?
Yes.
Haschak?
Yes.
Jackman?
Yes.
Carter?
Yes.
And Drudy.
Yes. Okay, now we need to recess as the Policy Advisory Committee, reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. Do we have a motion to ratify the action of the Policy Advisory Committee?
I will so move.
Second.
Director Brown?
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman?
Yes.
Alvin Smith?
Yes.
Haschak?
Yes.
Carter?
Yes.
And Drudy.
Yes. Okay, now we're on to informational reports. Rex, do you have any report from Caltrans?
Well, considering the communication is a little limited with calling in, I will point out that Feely has included a table that was put together actually by some of our planning staff here with our Native American Avon branch that covers all the projects, upcoming projects in Mendocino County. I don't have any specific updates other than we do have an online informational tool that we recently put online. I think I've probably mentioned this in the past. We've been working on it and trying to get it functional for a very long time, and it is now working. And I plan at the next meeting to do kind of a tutorial demonstration for the board, and hopefully that will be able to provide more detailed information about any project that anyone might be interested in finding out about. As user friendly as we could make it, but still I think a demo would be helpful. So that's the plan.
So Rex, can I just follow up? So the document that you have, because once the document's published, it's out there, could be on social media, for example. So if someone saw the document online, let's say, who would they contact? Who would be is there one point? Is there one email address at Caltrans? Who is it that they would have the best luck in getting a response if they had a question to follow up on seeing that list?
If I understood your question, who would be the best person to contact with a specific question about a project? Is that
Let's say a project on the list that you provided. If they had a follow-up question,
so you could contact me, and I could track down more detailed information, or the project manager that's listed, is the person that I would probably be speaking with. They're the ones who manage the projects and have the more detailed information, and they can be found online, but I can also find their contact information.
so I gather that, but if there was an email list listed on Facebook, let's say, I don't think you would necessarily want your email list listed. Would it be the District 1 information officer email list?
Yeah, I think if I'm
Okay. Right.
So just a little more, the table that's in your packet, you'll see it's organized by route, so state route and post mile. It includes the program that the project is in, so SHOP for the most part, are where these are, sometimes STIP. The project manager is listed, very brief description of the work, and then what phase the project is in. So just quickly, PA&ED is environmental, PS&E is final design essentially, and then construction. So it's a very useful list. We are glad to have that from Caltrans, and I anticipate that we'll be getting these quarterly through the tribal quarterly meetings.
Okay, great. And Rex, you said that you'll also show us at our next meeting an online portal where we or anybody in the public could find maybe additional information.
Yes.
Yes, I'm planning on doing that.
Yeah, we're going to plan that
And if
for.
you have any questions about any of the acronyms or anything like that, I can try to answer those.
Yeah, Director Brown?
What's a scour?
Rex, what's a scour?
SCOUR.
Scour is, it's on bridges when there's a storm or high water flows, the foundations of the bridges can be impacted, and they periodically have to go in and fix that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, do we need public comment on this item? Okay, great. Thanks a lot for the update.
Thank you.
Mendocino Transit Authority, as heard earlier, our meeting this last month was canceled, and so fully expect to meet in March. Okay, is there any update from North Coast Rail Authority?
Canceled the last meeting.
Okay, same thing.
So we have a meeting this coming Monday in Ukiah.
Okay. And then we're on to MCOG summary of meetings. Do you have any meetings you want to highlight?
No, unless there are questions about anything on the list.
Okay. Right. Let's see. Just administrative staff, California Transportation Foundation Forum. Do you want to talk about that?
Just briefly, you have my written staff report. I went over to the forum in Sacramento, and just to note, the highlights that kept coming up were, well, Senate Bill 1 was a theme for the day, and reporting on how that's going so far. And the other things that I kept hearing throughout that day was the SAFE rule. You've heard about, we've talked about that before. What's it called? It's the Federal Safer, Affordable, Fuel-Efficient Vehicles Rule, which everybody was complaining about. It's really kind of a problem for California that they're trying to work through. And so that came up frequently. I've got a program here if anybody wants to see it. Also, they, several times during the day, the speakers were reminding us all to get our real ID, if you've heard of that. That's the California identification that they want everyone to get. And so it's pretty soon when that's coming due. I think sometime this year we're all supposed to get that. So, and the other thing that came up frequently was climate action, climate resiliency, and programs around that. So those were kind of the themes of the day.
Okay, all right, thanks. Are there any miscellaneous reports?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Next, or do we need to discuss our next meeting date? It's listed on the agenda.
Yeah, so I think that our initial board calendar maybe had said it may or may not be needed, but it looks like we will need that April meeting. So that'll be at our normal date and time, first Monday in April at 1:30.
Yeah, I think we want to do that to bring back that joint powers issue that we talked about.
Correct.
Yeah.
And have the presentation from Caltrans on their mapping tool as well.
Right.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, MCOG planning staff. Do you have a question, Larry?
No, I want to get that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to give you a report on where we're at with our 2 grants. The first one, the SB 743 vehicle miles traveled. As we've reported in the past, this legislation, SB 743, required the state to change how transportation impacts on the environment are evaluated under CEQA. It shifts the transportation impact metrics for CEQA from level of service to vehicle miles traveled. And it presents a challenge for the analysis because lead agencies must decide what level of VMT change would constitute a significant transportation impact. So this project that we're working on is to develop the baseline standard from which to determine those thresholds. We're pleased to be working with Fair and Peers. I think we've mentioned before that they're widely acknowledged as an expert in the field. And I wanted just to give you an update of where we are. So we met with the consultant. MCOG staff has been regularly meeting with the consultant, Rod Brown, and monthly meetings, good coordination with him. The TAG met with the consultant on February 19th. It was the 3rd technical advisory group meeting. And the TAG is different than the MCOG TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, only by a few members. It's most of the TAC members plus some additional members that sit on the TAG that deal with these kinds of issues for local agencies. So we've been working with the consultant, and we have likely one more TAG meeting in April to review the draft product for the TAG, to review the draft product. The consultant held the 2 public workshops that we told you about recently, February 18th in Ukiah at the Farm Advisor's Office, and February 19th at Fort Bragg Town Hall. And even though the attendance was low for this type of a technical issue, you know, the public doesn't really come out much for vehicle miles traveled type presentations. But the consultant did tell me that, especially the Fort Bragg attendance, 13 attendees, he thought was very good. And Ukiah, we had 7 attendees. And the attendees were mostly from public agency staff, with a few consultants and 1 or 2 public members. So that project's going well, it's on track. The consultant intends to present the final plan to the MCOG board in June, and we anticipate this grant project will be completed by the end of the fiscal year and will not need to be carried over to next fiscal year.
So I'm sorry I missed the Fort Bragg meeting. I had a second meeting taking place at the same time in a different part of town.
Okay. We did have 1 MCOG board member, Michael Carter, came.
Okay,
That
thank
was
you,
good.
Michael.
Deputy Mayor.
I'll just add that although the workshops didn't have huge turnout, there was a lot of really good discussion at those workshops. So the people that were there were really engaged and made a lot of good points. So
Yes.
they were good workshops.
Right, and especially the planning staff is going to be implementing these new rules effective July 1st. They're very appreciative of MCOG sponsoring this project, and they seem to have good confidence in Fair and Peers that the end result's going to be very helpful. Okay. And just for your information, this was a grant project, a Caltrans planning grant project, and the consultant's contract for this work was just under $120,000 on it, just to give you a size of the scope of.
Will this help out the cities and the county with their own planning documents, because of the fact that we have to take in vehicle miles traveled into other planning documents?
Yes, that's what we're doing it for.
Yeah.
Yes, to give them the tools to know how to do the new analysis, right? And then there'll be a training at the end of the project to train local agency staff on how to go through the new methodologies also. Do you want me to go into the next one?
Sure.
Okay. And then Nafili might have something to add. But we're working on the Fire Vulnerability Assessment and Emergency Evacuation Preparedness Plan grant. And the project timeline for this grant seems to be on track. We've been coordinating with Category 5 professional consultants, and they continue to meet with fire chiefs and emergency services personnel and other partners on the technical advisory group, gathering data. We expect to, beginning today or soon, received some of their draft deliverables, such as the vulnerability assessment, and I think we're due to receive the draft evacuation plan in the next couple of weeks, I believe. So we'll be looking at those draft documents. And we've been having monthly check-in calls with the consultant. The next meeting of the Technical Advisory Group, the TAG for this project, is March 31st at the Farm Advisor's office. We are beginning to plan for the 4 public outreach forums that will be held in Ukiah, Willits, Wallala, and Fort Bragg in late spring, perhaps in early May. We're still firming up those dates. And the consultant plans to have the evacuation plan available this summer. We expect a presentation to the MCOG board in June. And this grant project will be carried over to the next fiscal year for the final deliverables. This is a larger consultant contract than the one we just spoke of. This consultant contract is just over $236,000. It's a very large scope of work. So,
I don't have anything to add. Director Carter is on the technical advisory group for that project. Do you have anything to add?
I've had a chance to review their first draft, and it's very impressive.
Good. That's great to hear.
Is that the vulnerability assessment?
They've got,
or the plan?
well, they sent me the plan because I'm working with them on the communications aspect of the plan. And from what I've seen, everything that should be in there is in there that I know of.
Okay.
So I'm very impressed with what they've done so far. And I know they want to have the actual evacuation plan out before fire season supposedly starts in May. So.
Okay. Is there any chance that some of us can see that first draft?
Well, we haven't seen the draft yet, but the
you haven't seen it
technical, once it's available, we'd be happy to send it to you if you want it.
Yeah, so the consultants are anticipating that they will have the draft available for the technical advisory group before their meeting March 31st. So at that time, we may have something that we could
that you could
share.
pass to the rest of us. Okay.
It would be at that point. It would be a very draft plan at that point, but.
No, I'm mostly concerned with the coast, which is often left out of all that.
The reason that I got a copy is I'm doing all of the communications aspect, not just the ham communications, but all the police, fire, and emergency communications, because I'm coordinating with the county communications officer on that. So they sent me a copy of that to make sure that everything was included in there. I ended up sending them a copy of a map that shows every one of the repeaters in the county for police, fire, and ambulances, so that they are included as critical facilities to make sure that we get them covered in the event of a fire.
I know that the consultants met with the fire chief in Fort Bragg and others, but I would like, as Tess would, I would like to see a copy of the draft as soon as possible, just to circle back with those people to make sure that we've captured what they wanted to see in there.
Can I also mention this, and this is going to sound dumb because I probably have it somewhere, but I noticed the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program report was submitted at some point earlier last year. Was that? It's at the bottom of this work plan number 8, the vulnerability report.
Yeah. The vulnerability assessment for this project?
Yeah. It's a ICARP.
The ICARP.
Oh, yeah, yes, I sent that in. You have to, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Well, my question is, I'm sorry I missed that.
No, that was, we were required to submit an ICARP, an initial case study, and then once the project's done, we have to submit one. Is that what she's asking?
Yes, so
Yeah,
that
okay.
was something that was done at staff level. That didn't
Oh,
come
not
before
Right, and
the
it was
board.
just maybe a 3 or 4 page document. We had to list the conditions at the beginning of the project, and then afterwards we have to do another ICARP. They call them case studies, so we had to do an initial case study. Basically, it just kind of listed the conditions right now, why we're doing this project, and then at the end, we have to come back and sit.
So
with another
I
key-
mention this because we're all working in a vacuum. I'm on the MCAC, which is the Mendocino County Climate Advisory, Action Advisory Council, MCAC. And we have a coastal group that is meeting frequently, actually, and we're having a think tank for what we can do, this county can do about climate. And anything that's already been produced or whatever would be awesome. And so I want to make sure we all coordinating with each other. I know the Board of Supervisors is anxious to see some of our recommendations.
Okay. Would you like me to send you that initial ICARP?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not real substantial. It's just kind of a
Eh.
existing condition type thing.
It's a
I'll
start.
send that to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So do you have any miscellaneous reports for planning?
Any miscellaneous planning?
Well, the only thing I'll mention is the draft fiscal year 2021 overall work program has been sent to Caltrans it was due today. So Lexi submitted that to Caltrans as required based on the recommendation from the TAC from their meeting about 2 weeks ago. So that draft work program does not come to the MCOG board. You will be looking at the final during budget times.
Okay, now we're on to MCOG Director reports.
I would like to know, we have a charging station that is starting, it's being built right now on the Safeway parking lot. Does anybody from this area know anything about it? Because we as a city don't know a thing about it.
I've heard of it, but where I heard of it was from City of Willett's Community Development Director. So I don't really know much else about it. It's a private company putting
Yeah,
in. Yeah.
I asked the person that runs the Safeway, and he said it just came down from corporate, that was it.
Right.
I think anyone could have asked for one.
Well,
yes.
we as
Well,
a city had no idea that it was even happening until they took up 11 spots.
Right, so I assume they're paying for it then. So there is a California state law in the last few years that requires that, city and county governments sort of fast track these things. They should streamline the permitting. They should allow these things to go forward unless there's some problematic issue involved with it. So, if the site checks out and everything looks good, they're meant to let them go ahead.
Well,
So it's moving pretty fast. I mean,
Well, we
I
were
saw
just
it.
interested because just a year ago, we got the charging stations downtown, and
Yes, right.
then this they fenced it off and went to work, and
Yeah.
everybody's just wondering first of all, they wanted to know what was happening, and then second of all, once they got the idea that that's what it was, or just that nobody knows anything about it. But it's nothing through MCOG or the state
No,
or anything
we're not
that you
involved in
guys know
it.
about.
It's a
Okay.
private, and you're going to see more and more of that. Here, we've been working on, making sure there are public charging stations that are available all the time and open to the public, open access, we call it. But in addition, you're going to be seeing a lot of private stations opening up all over the place. There are a lot of incentive programs and, reasons for them to go ahead. And so, they're kind of ahead of us, really, You've seen a lot of EV stations go in at, the inns and the wineries and restaurants and things like that. And Safeway's coming on board too, so I think we'll see more of that.
Director Hashek?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't need any permits for that?
I think they did.
Not
I
from
think they
us.
had to come to the city of Willits for a permit, yeah. Right,
Director
So
Brown?
that's kind of my question, the permitting process, and then
yes.
they gotta be wired into somebody's electric bill. Is it gonna be wired into Safeway's electric bill?
Well, I assume it's Safeway Corporate that's doing it, right? It's not the property owner. I think it's the company
Well,
that's
it's
doing
really
it.
not Safeway's property, it's privately owned property.
It's privately owned property, yes, they lease
They
that
get
site.
the electric bill?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, we don't know anything about it. That's what I'm saying.
You should check into that a little deeper. You should
Yeah.
dig a little deeper.
So I heard about it from Dusty.
That brings up
Dooley
my
because-
question, which is on this MCAC. One of the ideas that has come up is that they want the Board of Supervisors to consider putting or encouraging somehow electrical charging stations all over the county, and especially in all public buildings, hospitals, whatever. And I'm sure that's in line with what we're all about. I'm just wondering how MCOG can get involved or will get involved, or how does that happen?
We've been involved by creating a plan for starters, and that's been sort of an underlying supportive document that's assisted with, site location and grant applications and things like that, is sort of backing up all of that. So we've got the plan that's become useful. I've been involved in the Mendocino County Air Quality Management District Director has been involved in talks with Sonoma Clean Power and other players that are developing the incentive program. So there's an incentive program that's going to roll out this October that will pay for up to 80% of the costs of a charging station. And so, we're encouraging those who are cited or have jurisdiction on the areas where we want those stations. We're sort of trying to drive them to that program and apply.
So Janet,
Inline.
Sonoma Clean Power applied for a grant with the Energy Commission for Mendocino and Sonoma counties for installation of. So these grants are paying 80% of the cost of installation for public charging
The one
stations?
that's called CALEVIP, California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, I think that is. That's the one that I was involved with some early talks in developing that program for our county. And so there may be other things going on that Sonoma Clean Power is doing I'm not aware of, but that one is rolling out this October that Sonoma Clean Power and some other partners already got money for. And then there's another round coming up for this year that the other entities are applying. So, the state's directing a lot of money to these issues. And so these programs keep rolling out. And so I'm not sure which one was the one you were talking about.
Well, the one I've heard about at the Sonoma Clean Power meeting was the grant that they received for charging stations in Mendocino and Sonoma counties. And my understanding of those were for public charging stations.
Okay, that may be a different one. So this one is open, I believe, to public and private. So
And that's the CALEVIP
CALEVIP.
Okay.
Right. So,
Yeah, I just ran into a couple from Laytonville, and they don't have electric car, but they were pleasantly surprised to see the electric charging stations in Laytonville. And they may not have a whole lot of choices for restaurants, but they've got a whole bunch of charging stations.
yeah, that's a really good interregional, site on the corridor. That's pretty crucial to, filling up a long gap in distance, between stations. So that's a good site.
Unfortunately, those people are gonna go to Boomers.
They'll
While
go
they're
to
waiting
Boomers.
for their car to charge.
Is that where the Chinese restaurant is?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they said. They saw a lot of Teslas over there.
Well, we help support that grant application that ChargePoint put in for that money for the 101 corridor. And there were, I think, in our segment of the 101 corridor, there were 3 going in Mendocino County and 2 in northern Sonoma County. So so far that one's open. We're trying to get Leggett going and also Ukiah. So I'm waiting to hear from ChargePoint. They've been working on their thing, and I'm not up to date on that
So
one.
just briefly, Janet, in the past, you've said the single best place to look where there are charging stations in terms of a map or where they're proposed has been the map that's been maintained by the Visit Mendocino website. Is that still the case?
There was a website, and I think that's changed. That one went down, and wasn't that from was it one of the tourism bureaus?
That's what I'm saying. Visit
That's the
Mendocino
one.
has maintained
Visit Mendocino.
has maintained a page, that had a map, and
Yeah.
in the past, you had said that was the most up-to-date map of where they are and where they're proposed. Is that
Yeah,
still the case?
I'm not sure that's current anymore, and I'll have
Okay.
to get back to you on that. Now, there are, for people who drive electric vehicles, there are these phone applications, the phone apps for stations, and the best one everybody's saying is PlugShare, that has all the stations regardless of which network they're on. So if you're interested in looking at that, those are the kinds of things, you can download them for free and look up where the chargers are.
Okay, do we have any other director reports, comments? I don't know, is there anything for CALCOG?
You have the Regional Leadership Forum coming up next month. Director Alvin Smith will be attending, as well as a couple MCOG staff members.
Loretta and I are registered for that.
And I think that's the same day as MCOG.
We're gonna miss
And
it.
it is.
It is.
It does, I'm gonna.
How'd they do that?
How could they do that? I think they were scheduling it around the governor's possible appearance, so. Yeah, that's a first. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right, well then we'll, at 1 minute to 3, we'll adjourn.
Have a good day.
Thanks.